Okay, the next method that we're going to look at is now called the units of production method. So this is the one where we give this cost per unit, so a fixed cost per unit, but we multiply that by the number of units produced or used in the period. So there's two steps to this one. So the first part, as I said, we're calculating that per unit cost. And this is determined as our cost minus the residual value. So again, just using the amortizable cost. And now we divide by our estimated useful life, but not in years, in units of production. So the question, we're going to use the same question that we did in our straight line. We're going to use this for all the methods, but here we ignore the number of years. So you're using one or the other. In this case, we don't care about 5 years. We're just looking at these 400,000 kilometers. So we're going to take the cost of 65 minus the estimated residual value and divide by the 400,000 units of production. So we're calculating this cost per unit. 65,000 cost minus $5,000 residual value, and we divide that by 400,000 kilometers. So we've got 60,000 divided by 400,000, and this gives us a per unit cost of 15 cents per kilometer. So this is a fixed rate that we're going to use for the full life, but we're going to multiply it by kilometer. So our expense for the year will change because of different kilometers driven, but we're always using this fixed or constant 15 cents per kilometer. So our step 2, now that we have this, each year that we have the truck, we're going to multiply this cost per unit by the number of units used in the period. So in this case, it will be the number of kilometers driven. So we're going to look at this same example, and now we're going to use this bottom part to figure out the amortization expense each year. And we're going to go through and look at in T-account format again, but you could use the chart format that the textbook gives you, which I'll talk about or show in a minute as well. But we're going to consider this in the way we've looked earlier. So we've got our truck, and it's at 65,000. That's the cost, and that's where it stays. And then we've also got, so leave a bit of room on the left side here. We're going to need that. And then we have our T account in the middle, the accumulated amortization for the truck, and we use that to calculate the book value. And I've removed the formula here, but remember, the book value equals cost minus accumulated amortization. So cost minus accumulated equals the book value. Okay, so again, at the time of purchase, we know the accumulated amortization is 0, so our book value is 65,000. And also just to note, the book value is not a T account. It's just what we would show on the balance sheet, the net of these two. So our truck has a T account, accumulated amortization has a T account, so we use those two accounts to calculate book value. But book value is not actually a T account itself. Okay, so now we get to the end of December 31st, 2020, so year 1, and we need to book our amortization expense. So we know we're using this 15 cents per kilometer, and then in this extra information, it tells us that the truck was driven 90,000 kilometers in year 1. So for year 1, we take 90,000 kilometers and times by the 15 cents. And that would give us 13,500. So that would be the amortization expense that we book for that year. So we debit amortization expense, credit, as we are using here, our accumulated amortization for the truck. So same accounts under the different methods, it's just a different dollar value. So now we know our accumulated amortization at the end of year 1 is 13,500, and our book value, 65,000 minus this accumulated, gets us to 51,500. So you have to go through for all of the years of this asset and figure out the number of kilometers, times that by the 15 cents. So for 2021, which is year 2, we look back to the question here. In year 2, 120,000 kilometers were driven. So now we take 120,000 kilometers times this by 15 cents, and we end up with 18,000. So in that year, year 2, we would have debited amortization expense for 18,000. So you can see it's a different amount because it depends on the number of kilometers driven. So we add 13,500 plus 18,000. Our new accumulated balance is 31,500. And that gives us a book value of 33,500. So our $65,000 cost minus the 31,500 gets us to 33,500. Okay, so now you can try the next few years on your own. I'll keep working here, and then I'll start talking again when I get to the end. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have you pause it. So I want you to try and complete this and get to the end of year 5. They've given you kilometers for all of these years. So get through that, and then when you're done that, you can hit play again, and I'll have mine completed and we'll go through that. Okay, so here's my completed chart now that you're back. So for year 3, I took 100,000 times 15 cents, got me the expense of 15,000, and then that led us to accumulative 46,500 and our book value there. Year 4, it was 60,000 times 15 cents, got us expense of 9,000 in that year, which got us to a total accumulated amortization of 55,500, book value of 9,500. In year 5, we drove another 30,000 kilometers times our 15 cents, got us amortization expense in that year of 4,500, got us to the accumulated of 60,000, and it left us with a book value of $5,000. Now this question made it so that at the end of these 5 years, we'd driven exactly 400,000 kilometers, which was what we estimated, and it left us with our book value equal to the residual value. And we know that that is where we stop amortizing the asset. So if we had the truck in year 6 and we drove it another 20,000 kilometers, we wouldn't record any more amortization because we've already reached the end of our useful life in kilometers. And we've gotten to this residual value equal to, or our book value equal to our residual. So that's always where you stop. Now I want to note that this question made this happen exactly at the end of year 5, but that's just, we'll say, a coincidence that we estimated the useful life would be 5 years. And we wanted to show it, how it would work in 5 years. when you see other questions in the textbook or you could see it on an exam, you're not necessarily going to get this final year as a full amount of kilometers. And what I mean by that is, let's say instead here we drove 40,000 kilometers in year 5. If I said, well, 40,000 times 15 cents, now that would be booking $6,000. So my new accumulated would be 61,500. And if I take that, I gotta do some math, you guys, my brain's not working fast enough. So 65,000 minus the 61,500, we're now sitting at this value of 4,500. 3,500. See, my math's not very good. And that is less than the residual value. So you might go through a question and calculate this out, but when you see that you're at an amount less than the residual value, you realize you actually need to fix what you've done. So when you're getting to the end of this, you actually want to be tracking where you're at in terms of kilometers. Because here we amortized 410,000 if we use this 40. And that's too much. We needed to stop at 400,000. So even in this question, if it told you 40,000, you would actually only be able to record the amortization equal to the 4,500. So something to be aware of when you get to other questions, that you can only record amortization up to those units of production and to the point where your residual value equals your book value, or where your book value equals your residual. So be careful on that when you get to future questions. But otherwise, you just use that fixed rate, times it by the units of production, and we can see here, so this is a journal entry where we would have had the expense. This is the expense, this is the expense, this is, and this is. So it changes every single year depending on the amount of kilometers. So if you're to do a question like this and it asked you, what was the amortization expense in year 3? What would you say? So it would be this 15,000 because that's the amount that we calculated for year 3. So making sure if you're using this T account, you know what the different amounts here mean. Each time we're calculating it, that's the expense that you would have booked in the year. So in year 3, we would have debited amortization expense for 15,000, credit the accumulated amortization for the truck for that amount. So here we're doing the full calculation, but that's the journal entry that you would see to get it into the T account. Okay, so that's the units of production. In our next video, we're going to look at the declining balance and see how that goes.